So yeah, I'm originally from New Zealand. I moved over here 12 years ago, and started working on a couple of different ranches, and just basically figuring out a few things from New Zealand that we could implement over here that would potentially work. My background was a 365-day grazing season, so then coming over here and finding out that we were looking at about 120 days. That was pretty short compared to what I was used to. So from a grass-fed and full-on grazing background, I guess we were trying to look at different systems from the New Zealand side that we could implement here and try and come up with at least extended grazing, if not year-round grazing. And I guess, a big part of that system, it needed to be profitable too. We couldn't just do it for fun, because you can only really do that for so long. Although it is fun, but it's more fun if you can make some money while you're doing it. So 12 years ago, first moved to a place in Alberta, managed that for 3 years, and we implemented a lot of rotational grazing systems, set up some water systems and things like that, and just sort of got a feel for the seasons and what we could do. And then moved to a place at Hardisty in Alberta still, and there we started implementing more of the year-round grazing system. So we had some swath grazing and different things that we were playing around with. And then after a few years, kind of started getting into more of the grass finishing stuff and looking at how we could build that grass finish system to fit in with what we're already doing. So we've kind of been on that path for the last 10 to 12 years, and I guess we kind of feel like we're maybe getting somewhere, but it takes a bit of time to figure out. So I guess a few differences coming from Canada versus New Zealand. So here we've got forage growth from May to August, so a pretty short time, and a grazing season of 120 to 150 days. That was typical or traditional, I guess you'd call it. But what was really interesting, we could grow the same amount of dry matter here in that short season as we were growing in New Zealand over a 12-month season, in dryland parts of New Zealand anyway. So that was pretty interesting. That adds a whole another set of challenges here to try and utilize that growth that we have properly to stretch it out for the length of the season. And so then, New Zealand with our 365 days and forage growth year round. So there was a few key differences there. So our current operations, we've got one in Alberta at Hardisty. So that's prairie land and cattle with 16,000 acres in total. We have about 5,000 acres of cash crop and annual feed crops. And over the last 4 years out there, we've been moving into organic and transitioning some acres as we go. And then we have roughly around about 11,000 acres of rotated pastures. We've just dropped our cow numbers there because we've set up another farm at Ryan, Saskatchewan, so just east of Yorkton. So we've actually moved 1,000 cows from our Hardisty operation out to that one, and then we're going to we can build our numbers back up at Hardisty, but also we can build more of our cropping rotation and start cropping more acres into that system as well. So I guess we've got a little bit of flexibility, and we're kind of making it work. So the place at Birch Island is the name of the place at Ryan. So we're about 15,000 acres. It's going to be mixed cattle and crop, about 12,000 acres of pasture and 3,000 acres of cash crop, and we're just over 2,000 cows. We'll build up to carry all those progeny there as well. And looking at wintering those calves, we'll take them through to yearlings typically, and then whatever market we have on a grass finish system, we'll take them through to finish. Others will market as yearlings if we haven't got the market at the other end. And so that's a lot of that ground there, and I'll kind of go into it a little bit further here. But our I guess a key thing with our system, we're looking at our crop rotations. And our whole farm is basically looked at as a rotation. We haven't got set areas for cropping and set areas for cattle. We've got, it's a whole farm approach. So we're looking at a high legume perennial pasture for that 5 to 6 years. It could be longer, sort of depends. That we've got some flexibility there. If the stands are good and the markets on the cattle side are good, then we can leave it in and just play around with that as the years go. But I guess when we started in the organic thing there, kind of realised that the key part of making that system work for us was having the integration of livestock. Without the integration of livestock, I think it's going to be a lot longer process. I'm not saying it can't be done, especially when we start looking at regenerative. I think we can get there a lot faster if we can add livestock into that system. So, and a big part of this sort of rotation, we were looking at the tillage and stuff we were doing and thinking, man, we can't keep tilling this ground year after year after year. We've got to be adding some things in. So hence that's why we've got an extended perennial part of the rotation and then a shorter cash cropping window of probably, we've got 2 years in there. It could be 2 to 3. I mean, if we can stretch that out a little bit more and the market's there, then we'll do that as well. But we've got to make sure that we're not degrading that land. And when we take it out of pasture, we want it to be a good, healthy stand. We want to be able to look at that stand and say, shit, that's one of the best stands we've got. And that's when we want to take it out. We don't want to wait till the alfalfa's gone, it's reverted back to native grasses, it's we're not getting anything putting back into the soil. We're going to take that out and keep that cycle going and hopefully keep building that biology. So we're working through this. It's not set in stone, but we've definitely got some flexibility with that system. So I'll kind of run through the process of what we've done at Birch Island. So we took this over in the spring, basically not quite 12 months ago. So a lot of it was reasonable land. It had been cash cropped for probably the last 100 years. Hadn't had livestock on it, so we knew we needed to get livestock on it and get good productive forages as well. So our take was good productive land is going to grow good productive forages. So let's get our forages growing on some of that better land and not send the cows to the crap land. And because that's kind of what happens. We've got a poor quarter over there. The cows typically end up heading over there, and then we think the cows make no money, but that land's not going to make any money growing crop either. So we've got to compare apples with apples when we're actually looking at cattle systems versus crop systems, and make sure there's not a bias there. So this area of the farm that we've basically developed first for livestock is a 3,000 acre piece of land, and so we seeded that down in the spring. We put up about 40 miles of fence total, not just on that area, but total in this last year of perimeter fence, and then we silaged and green feeded. We silaged 1,800 acres there, and green feed about 6,000 bales. So that was our first year. We didn't bring cattle in on that particular area right away, but we got feed production. And the price of feed, I mean, that was pretty good revenue that we pulled off that ground in a drier year for us. We did better than we would have, in my mind, with any cash crop, or conventional cash crop anyway. So I mean, we look at our forages and we look at our feed basically as a cash crop. It's not just forage that cows walk on. I mean, it's part of a cash cropping rotation, and if you can sell it for money, then it's part of that system. So water and cross fence is the next thing. We would have liked to had that done at the end of last year, but the way the season went, we kind of didn't quite get to that point. As a lot of you, I guess, are aware of, the autumn kind of turned up and then winter set in. So spring we'll be setting up the internal fences, the cross fences, the water systems and pipelines for that. So wherever we can, if we can have a main water source, run that out to a trough, and we can then put that trough where we want it within a quarter. Typically, it's going to be in the centre, and then we'll run cells and paddocks back to that water. And then, so stage 5, I guess, 2020, we'll have cattle on that land. And as I'd said before, it's been over 100 years since we've had livestock on that land. So that's going to be pretty exciting to kind of get this last 12 months up our sleeve and kind of get the cattle back out there. So I'll just go into some of the production numbers and sort of things like that we look at. So like I said before, we had a 120-day grazing season was pretty typical for a standard system. So if we can add 2 months to that, I mean, it's just simple math, but we get an extra 50% longer season. So August, September, October are actually the best times to put weight on cattle. And typically in our old system, I mean, that's when they were going to the feedlot, the grasses were, done or depleted, and then that time of year they were heading to the feedlots and getting finished, and that was kind of just what happened. Yet that was the best time to put weight on cattle. We've still got water availability, temperatures aren't too hot, we've got some mild conditions. And so if we can grow some good quality feed at that time, then we should be able to extend that grazing and keep those cattle out and be productive. So that's basically what the New Zealand system is kind of modelled on too. We've got 4 distinct seasons. We get a lot of rain down there, but we can be pretty dry as well. So there's always these windows. We can grow crops 12 months of the year, which helps. But looking at those different types of crops for those different shoulders of the season, and in my mind, there was no reason that we couldn't use those for at least that autumn time. Seeded in the spring and get those cattle out there, or keep them out there in the autumn. So basically, this model is just basically getting back to basics, I guess, and just, this is just looking at a 12-month system and what we've actually got available. So we've got our perennial forages that we can utilise at that middle time of the year. That was kind of a given, and then we've got the shoulders of our season. So we're looking at some annual forage crops that we can seed after that, and then we're moving into some swath grazing crops on that ground, for the winter time, and then some biannual crops or some full seeded crops that we can graze in that early part of the spring. So annual forage crop grazing. So I'll just run through some of these numbers here. So these are kind of generic numbers, call them. So we take a 6,000 pound of dry matter production. So we're looking at about an 8-ton silage crop is going to give you around about 6,000 pounds of dry matter. So if we take that, we put 1,200 pounds, 20%, we say we're going to, trample in, put back into the soil, however you want to look at it. We've got 4,800 pounds of consumable or utilisable dry matter. So we take a yearling, grazing 2.5% of its body weight at 1,000 pounds, it's going to eat 25 pounds of dry matter. So therefore, we've got 192 grazing days per acre available. If we look at a period of 90 days, so the end of the season, we've got a stocking rate of just over 2 to the acre, and if we gain 2 pounds a day, we've got 384 pounds of beef produced per acre, and put whatever value you want. There's a $1.50 on there, so we're looking at over $500 an acre on that ground. And then, that's not taking into account any of the benefits that we feel that we're getting from that soil by having livestock on it too. There's definite value there. This is just looking at the numbers. From what we've seen, I guess we need to make the numbers work. The added benefits that we get are kind of a bonus. In my mind, they're worth a lot, but when when you're actually talking about it, it's easier, I guess, to look at actual numbers and put a value. So, if we can actually make money off that land, then those added benefits are huge, and then they're effectively a bonus. So looking at a 12-month, a great typical grazing season here. So we're we've got 25 cows per quarter is kind of that average grazing. When you look at the numbers across the prairies, I guess 25 cows per quarter is a number. I don't know how they come up with that number, but it seems to be average, and it seems to be what everyone does. So or not everyone, but a lot of people follow that trend. So basically when we do the maths here for a 184-day grazing season with 25 head on there, we've got 4,600 head days, total pounds of dry matter eaten or consumed 184,000, effectively gives us a bale an acre is what we're looking at on average for that pasture. So if we take those numbers and actually look where that feed is produced, most of it's produced in the May, June, July area, time frame. So 80% of it is produced in that time, but yet, we leave our cattle out for a lot longer than that. Traditionally, we did leave our cattle out for a lot longer than that. So, what we're looking at is actually focusing the numbers. We can run a lot more head on that area too if we actually focus cattle on that when the forage is growing and utilisable, instead of, leaving them right out there and grazing it down to nothing. And so we'll actually look at taking cattle off in that August, September, October period and basically leaving that vegetative growth in those stands at the end of the year, and that helps with survivability and building up root reserves as well. So we might not take everything off, but we definitely look to destock at that time to help the longevity of those forages. And it's not like we're just wasting that feed. It's basically just utilised the following spring. So we'll get cattle out there early now in that April time, utilise that feed. It's gone through its winter, and then it's good. It's basically there, ready to graze. We can graze it off and get that old grass off. Oh, I'm going to get a drink here. Get that old grass off so that then we've got good available sunlight and stuff getting into that ground for the new grass to start growing. So we're rotating those pastures. If we weren't rotating those pastures, it'd be a little bit different. We'd probably end up overgrazing them in the spring, but we're not. We're moving those cattle around, cleaning that off, and basically by the time we look to get around a full rotation length, we want the good green grass to be coming in, and then we just keep rotating through that. So looking at using these same numbers, I guess, and looking at the cow side versus the yearling side that we were before, and take an 8-ton crop, growing an 8-ton silage crop equivalent, growing on some annual land. Same thing, we'll put 20% of that back in the ground, 4,800 pounds of consumable dry matter. So a cow and a calf now eating 41 pounds per head. So we should have 116 head days per acre available. So if we graze that for 90 days, we've got a stocking rate of 1.29. So the benefits of putting in that annual crop, if we can get those numbers, for every acre of annual crop allows for 1.29 pairs to be taken off perennial pasture for 90 days. So effectively 100 acres of annual crop is going to hold 129 animals for that time period. Therefore, if we go back to our average stocking rate of 25 cows per quarter, we can effectively destock 5 quarters for 90 days of perennial pasture, put them onto our annual pasture, and that basically then gives us 5 times 150. We've got 750 acres of perennial pasture that we can actually let regrow in that autumn time, and actually feed our cows better on some of these high quality annual feed crops that we'll put in. So then the benefits of that, again, we've got good early spring turnout on those perennials. We've got better winter survivability and longevity, and stronger, vigorous regrowth come the springtime, and then better animal performance as well, and better weight gain in the wintertime too. So that's kind of what we're looking, getting longevity out of those pastures and increasing that production per animal. So some early spring grazing, but basically before the perennials or in conjunction with some of the perennials, we had that window at the start of the season where we're kind of looking to get cattle out a little earlier or some higher quality feed while some of those perennials get going as well. And so for this one, for instance, we've done a lot with winter triticale, and there's fall rye and other things that can be used as well, seeded in the autumn. get out there early. So this example, we got 280 acres. We had 590 steers, 75 grazing days, just over 2 pounds of gain per acre, and gain per head, and average daily gain of 2 pounds, gain per head of 160, and gain per acre of 337. So that was the first 75 days of the season, and then after that we'll stitch in a cover crop into that, and look at getting some autumn production out of that same area. So, this example here in 2016 we got an extra 200 pounds an acre in the autumn time. 2017 we got 50 pounds. It was a dry year. This was out in Alberta. But that 50 pounds is still valuable. I mean, it was super valuable. It was a dry year. It probably returned more than the 200 pounds because we're in a feed shortage, and we actually had something to graze. So we'll look at our system, and we'll work towards the 8 out of 10 years that it's going to work, and put something in instead of worry about the 2 years that it's not going to work. So a lot of people will say, well, what if it doesn't rain? Well, if it doesn't rain, nothing's going to grow. And if it does rain, we're going to have feed there. I mean, we've not had a situation where we've got nothing. We've had situations where we've grown less, but then it's typically been more valuable because it's been a dry situation. So, we look at having some flexibility and stuff too. So when we put these systems in, I mean, it doesn't just have to be grazed. That example beforehand was grazed, but we also have had situations where we've had wet years and we've actually let those crops run through, and we've combined them as well. So we're looking to truly integrate both of those two systems and get the best out of both, depending on what the season kind of throws at us. So this example here, we had one area where we didn't graze at all, and we just combined. We got 90 bushels of triticale off it. We had one there that we grazed once and then let it run to seed and combined it. The second one we grazed twice, still let it run to seed and then combine it as well. And then one where we all grazed. So if you just the net difference column, I guess at the far side there, we were actually net better off grazing and combining that same crop. So letting it regrow and having something there to combine. So that was pretty interesting. It's going to be slightly different on the years, but it's just an example of having some flexibility and I guess some resilience in the system to be able to do some different things. So on these crops, when we're grazing them, I guess the photo on the left is really what we want to be grazing. It's short, vegetative. If we can take 50% of that and still leave some leaf and some solar panel, then that's going to really regrow. So, but the challenge there, I guess, if you look at the photo on the right, is that we've got a 20-day difference between the two. So we've got to have a lot of animals on that area to keep that quality where we need it to be. The cattle are still going to gain when they're grazing the stuff on the right, as long as you don't push them to clean it up. So the one on the right, by the time it gets to there, we're going to start losing per acre production or performance. As long as we don't push the cattle too hard, they'll still gain all right, but our overall per acre production will drop. So there's a few challenges there. I mean, if we're looking at a 3-week rotation and then we get an inch of rain, then that makes a huge difference to how those rotations are actually going to work. So a lot of these rotations, when we're deciding on what to do and when to move the cattle, it's based on the growth of the plant at the time. It's not necessarily based on just moving into a new field every 2 days. We'll make areas bigger with smaller with electric fence, or take them down, make them bigger, depending on how much available feed is there and how fast it's growing. So these are the two examples. The 2016 on the left is the cover crop that was seeded into that triticale afterwards. So there's a lot more production there than the one on the right, which was the 2017 crop, but still really valuable and really high performance feed that we're grazing in, I guess, in both of those situations. So we want to have something green and growing for as long as we can, right the way through the year, I guess, if we can have a living root in the ground is what we're working towards. So then we'll move into our winter system. our swath grazing. So this is really interesting to me coming from New Zealand. If we cut something down and leave it on the ground for any more than probably 10 days, it starts to rot. A pretty unique situation, I guess, working to our strengths. We've got 6 or 7 months worth of winter. We might as well utilise them as best we can. And you guys might have 8 out here, I'm not sure. But we want to utilise that cold, I guess. We can cut it down in October, leave it underneath the snow, and it can be as near the same quality when we cut it 6 months later. So that's pretty unique. There's not many places in the world that you can actually go and do that. We used to grow a lot of cereals and stuff in those mixes, and traditionally that was what we were using. Then a lot of the brassicas and turnips and forage variety species that we were growing in New Zealand, we started implementing them over here and seeing if we could make them fit within that season as well, and actually extend the growing season, I guess, of those plants. So that's worked really good. We've got good green material that we're swathing down at the end of the year, which we know is good quality. There's some of our typical swaths that we're grazing. We're actually swathing less area than we used to swath. We're starting to actually leave more of these standing and graze them into the early parts of the winter as well, just out in the field. So another thing that we've started doing is we've started leaving our calves on our cows through the winter period. Because we've got quality feed, we've been able to do that. So typically it's end of February, between the middle of February and the middle of March is when we wean our calves, and then we start calving at the start of May. So some of those cows have a 6-week window where they don't have a calf on them, and everyone said, "Oh, you can't do that. Like they're not going to get bred. They're not going to cycle and all that." Those calves aren't getting all their consumption from that cow. I mean, it's more of a companion thing come that time of year. They're producing a little bit of milk, but the big reason that we've been able to do that is because we've been growing quality feed. We can leave them on right through the winter. We're marketing those calves as yearlings in that following spring. So we're kind of marketing them at a time where a lot of other people aren't. We did wean in November and try and hit the rush that everyone else was in, and then that didn't really make a lot of sense either. So and with our grass-fed system, we're retaining ownership of a lot of those animals anyway. So that actually works really has worked really good. So then if you just you can look at the shit on there, and I mean that's the middle of November. There's not a lot of snow that year, but we've got good loose manure. So we know we're getting good feed quality, and there's going to be a lot of minerals and vitamins in that feed that those cattle are getting, as opposed to some old dry green feed that they may otherwise be eating. So those calves we'll leave them out there on the cow, wean in February, March time, and then we'll fence line wean them with an electric fence, and the calves will stay on one side, so their feed doesn't change. We just pull the cows off, and we'll leave them side by side for a week or 10 days, and then the cows go, and the calves stay there and finish doing what they've been doing for the rest of the winter. So again, quality and utilisation is huge. So if we have good quality feed, we'll get the utilisation, we'll get the production that we need per acre, and the performance on those animals as well to make it profitable. So that was our winter system. So our perennial grazing. So in New Zealand, there's a small area of the country that you can actually grow alfalfa. It's the driest part of New Zealand, so it's good that alfalfa grows there. A lot of other areas, we've got high moisture and deep clay soils, and the alfalfa doesn't really work in those environments. Now some of the drier parts of New Zealand are actually the most profitable farm enterprises because they've adapted their systems to grazing alfalfa. So that's pretty unique. So when I first came here and could see the stuff growing in the ditches, and I thought, man, that's pretty awesome. So we had to figure out then how we could manage that stuff intensively and use that to our advantage. There's a lot of negativity, I guess, about grazing alfalfas, and there's definitely some challenges, and I guess, you know, we've been through some of those challenges, but we also realised that it was a part of our system that we needed to figure out and get on top of. So hold on, okay. So I got this run slides around the other way, but I'll go through this next example here. So back to our 25 cow per quarter example, that's sort of pretty traditional. So, you know, effectively growing a bale an acre on that ground. So that ground, so a bale an acre, I mean, it's not very productive. It's not very profitable. Most of the time what happens, we put a hay crop in, and then we graze it for the first so many years until the hay production is no good, probably about a bale an acre, and then we think we kick the cows out there. So if we can't make money growing a bale an acre, how do we expect the cows to make money if that's all it's growing? So I'll run through an example here, I guess, on just kind of where I'm going with this. In this area, I guess, what would an average an average new seeded field produce bale an acre? Or how many bales per acre? Can someone tell me? 3. Is there any way you grow a bit more? No. What's that? 5? Where else? Good? Okay, 3, 5. I've already filled in these numbers, so we'll go for 4. So basically, you know, we're looking at 4 to 6 on a new seeded. New seeded is pretty typical. So you know, we take a new seeded field. We've got 4,800 pounds an acre of dry matter. So therefore, 4 bales an acre. So 720,000 pounds of dry matter consumed per quarter. If we take a 150 acre quarter, gives us 18,000 head days. So then basically the equivalent cows per quarter, you know, we're at 97. So there's a big difference between 25, the average, if you'd look at, I've looked at Manitoba and Saskatchewan, Alberta, basically in that 20 to 25 range is kind of where it seems to be. So you know, there's basically a 400% increase in carrying capacity on that land, which is a massive opportunity, I guess, for the beef industry if we can actually figure out how to utilize that feed. And you know, it's going to take management, obviously, but there's you know, it's there. I mean, the dollars are right there. I mean, we're making, if we use $1.25 for a cow calf pair in the summer, we're making $57.50. Or if we can actually get that other production, we're looking at $22,000. So you know, there's a big difference in production. So I'll run through this example too. So this is from the Saskatchewan Forage Council, a forage fact sheet on alfalfa. So this is from our Forage Institute. So hay production, basically, we're looking at, if we take take the brown soil zone, we're at 62.49 pounds per acre. Then, and then we look at our grazing production. We're at 1.8 in the brown soil zone, 1.8 animal units per acre. So if we just do the math on that, I mean, we've got hay production, and these are comparing newly seeded fields, I guess. That's what they're saying the stocking rate should be. So if we do the numbers, if we're growing 62.49 pounds of dry matter divided by 25 pounds for an animal unit, that gives us 250 head days per acre, and for 30.5 animal unit months, we're actually at 8.2. So I don't know, is there any researchers here or anyone from any institutes that have done some numbers on animal unit production? Okay, that's no one. Right, but there's a massive discrepancy between the actual production that's being obtained and what our universities and institutes are telling us that we should be stocking this ground at. And on the same note, we'll turn around and we'll say that our cows are the most efficient users of forage growing, yet they're actually utilising 4 times less than we can harvest with a tractor. In order to achieve those numbers and get that grazing production up, we obviously need to change our system. We can't just stick 100 cows on a quarter and expect them to last there. That land needs to be managed. That's why we're putting fence, we're putting infrastructure, we're putting things in to actually get that production. But that's our cheapest form of production. If we can spend $200 an acre on seed and fence and water and get 4 times the production, that's pretty cheap land. So that's effectively what we're working towards. So with that we need high density rotational grazing is a big part of that. And same as with our annual pastures, our perennial pastures, we're managing that grass as it grows. We're changing those rotations. We're taking fields out if the grass growth starts getting away. We can make hay, or we can conserve that feed, or utilise it at a different time. It's not just a set structured rotation. So then our spring and summer, so our perennials again. So a lot of alfalfa, sandfoin, vetches, clovers, newer ryegrasses. We're looking at different newer species to obtain some of that production. So then with alfalfa, we got fast animal growth rates. We know we can get over 2 pounds a day. We're getting that nitrogen fixation in the ground and better water conversion to energy. We can grow twice the dry matter with on an alfalfa stand, or a mixed alfalfa stand, as we can with just a traditional grass mix. So hence we needed to figure out how to graze it properly. We got deep soil water storage, utilisation and reliability with our tap roots going down there, the ability to extract nutrients from deeper in the soil, and then we're getting better animal fertility as well, and early rumen development in the young stock while they're on those pastures. So that was key. So one of the biggest challenges, I guess, that we were faced was with bloat, and I guess that's one reason that a lot of people won't graze alfalfa or are hesitant to graze alfalfa. And yeah, so we've been there. We've killed cattle on alfalfa. Not saying we haven't. So we needed to figure out how to manage it properly because of those I guess associated risks if it's not done right. And so some of our management practices for our first line of protection we're moving in the afternoon once the dew's gone, so not having any wet feed. Never move hungry animals onto fresh alfalfa. And we're looking at a 4 to 6 day grazing window when the field is 50% or more alfalfa. If it's 50% or less, we're grazing it more like a grass. If it's more than 50%, we'll treat it like it's an alfalfa field, and we'll have a 4 to 6 day grazing window. That way we can monitor that feed, because our biggest risk is when those cattle get hungry and moving them. So if we're on daily moves, then it can be a difference of 2 hours between when those cattle are full and when they're hungry again. So you kind of you got less room for error, I guess. So with a 4 to 6 day window, we can still monitor that pasture and move them a day earlier or a day later, knowing that they've got good feed and they're not hungry. So adding fibre as well to that. So up to 20% of their intake can be fibre. That slows rumen development and maintain rumen function. Encourages chewing and salivation as well, which helps maintain rumen pH. And then depends where you are, it can be a cheaper form of dry matter too if you're using some straw or something. And prices have kind of gone up in the last couple of years, but that works good. So we'll just shred some of that at the at-risk times of the year when it's at the highest bloat chance, and then and have that out, and they'll just graze that and basically mix their own ration. So there's some other things as well. We can put bloat soap in the water systems. water additives, and there's also some boluses in that can be used to help alleviate that. Pretty much now we don't use the other 3 at the bottom there. We'll just it's more our management. We know we've got that figured out, so we can manage it. But those other things can be pretty helpful. So I guess getting the low-hanging fruit in the system. So looking at what bits we're missing, where we can add value to that system, and by stretching our grazing season, we know we're able to do that. There's a lot within an existing system. That's what we found that we could change without having to spend a huge amount more money to obtain that extra production. We did have to change our management, and our style of grazing was probably the biggest change that we had to make. So this is just an interesting slide I kind of put up. So for every 1% increase in organic matter equates to 25,000 gallons of available water, and that's holding capacity in the ground. So that's effectively an inch of rain. So if we can hold that inch and utilize it, it's actually better than an inch because it actually stays there and it can be utilized at a later time of the year. So that's what we're looking when we look at our regenerative system. We want to be building our organic matter, and when we look at our organic system, we want to make sure that that's what we're doing too. So no matter what we're doing, what system we got, it has to be building our organic matter. That's our main priority. And so if we can develop an organic grazing and grain system that can do that, then that's exactly where we want to be. But we're not going to compromise that system in order to be in one space or another. That's kind of our main. That's definitely our main focus. Building a resilient system. A resilient system can withstand the ups and downs of the different seasons and the different markets. So for us, having feed allows flexibility and options. Having options then allows us to be in control. And then when you're in control, you can make smart decisions. And when you make smart decisions, you're able to make some money. So I guess that's the other part of our system that goes kind of right up there with building organic matter. I mean, we obviously need to be able to make money for that for us to be able to do that. Otherwise, we're not going to be farming very long. And then our regenerative system, so it's regenerative and soil focused. We've got short annual crop rotations and an extended perennial in there. So if we look at our 8-year rotation, that's we've got 5 to 6 years of perennials and legume-based pastures, and then 2 to 3 years of cash crop. So aiming for reduced tillage. So the land at Ryan is not organic land, but that's our plan, is to build that into an organic system. So it could be in basically 3 years' time. A lot of that land can then go into that system. So that's what we're looking at moving into. So then, looking at reducing our tillage when we take that land into grain production for that cycle. And then there's companion crops and things that we're growing with our cereal crops as well, so that we've got some diversity and something that can stay in the ground and keep growing. And then also the use of winter crops. So I'll just finish on this last slide. So the industry average, when we're looking at conventional beef production, we've got there's basically $150 a head. This is probably high. It's probably more like between $100 to $150. So it's a pretty tight margin game. So we've got to make sure that we're not just spending money where we don't have it to spend, I guess, and actually analysing that system. Basically, what that means is that half of the producers are making $300 and the other half are making none. It's kind of how averages work. And that's kind of reality when we look at some of the systems and that some of the conventional systems. So that's kind of that. So I'll leave you with that one, and I guess I'll take some questions. Yeah. It depends how long we've been living in an area. Oh, sorry, so our perimeter fence, is it 4-strand barb or is it 2-wire electric? So the land that we've got out in Alberta, been established there for pretty much 100 years, the family has. So, we know the neighbours around that area, so we can put electric fence up and feel that we can contain the animals, I guess. The land that we've just moved to, it's surrounded by crop farmers. So we want to try and make some friends. So we're putting up 4-wire barb around those areas so that we know we're secure. But we're not hesitant to put up electric fence as perimeter. We'll graze a lot of stubble as well in the autumn time. So fence off even neighbouring stubble and stuff like that. And so we'll put basically a single or a 2-wire electric around that. They're grazed in the autumn, the crops are off. Kind of depends how much trust you have in your fence units and how well your systems are set up. And there's some pretty good fence units in that out now. So, we're not hesitant to do that, sure that, those fences are managed accordingly.